The small village of Embervale sat nestled in a valley, surrounded by dense woods and towering cliffs. Its charm lay in its isolation, where the villagers lived in harmony with the land. But Embervale harbored a secret, one known only to the village elders and their chosen protectors. The woods around the village were home to something ancient and powerful: the Guardian. Lucas, a stoic man in his early 30s, had always been curious about the stories of the Guardian. Growing up, he heard whispers of a creature that protected the village from unseen dangers, but no one ever elaborated. The only thing clear was that no one dared venture too far into the forest. One cold autumn evening, Lucas sat with his friends, Edwin, a sharp-tongued merchant, and Calder, a blacksmith built like a fortress. The trio often gathered near the village square, sharing tales or debating the mysteries of their home. "Lucas," Edwin said, his eyes narrowing mischievously, "you're always asking about the forest. Why don't you just go find out what's in there?" Calder chuckled, shaking his head. "Don't encourage him. The elders say the forest isn't ours to explore for a reason." Lucas smirked. "Aren't you curious? For years we've lived under this shadow of superstition. What if it's all just a story to keep us from wandering too far?" "You'd risk angering the Guardian?" Calder asked, raising an eyebrow. "If it even exists," Lucas replied. The conversation lingered in Lucas's mind long after his friends had gone. The village had always felt like a cage to him, its boundaries defined by fear. That night, he resolved to uncover the truth. At dawn, Lucas packed a bag with food, water, and his father's old hunting knife. He left a note for his friends, knowing they'd try to stop him if they knew. The forest was eerily quiet as Lucas stepped beneath its canopy. The air was cool, and the ground was covered in a thick layer of leaves that muffled his footsteps. The deeper he ventured, the more the trees seemed to close in around him, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers. Hours passed, and Lucas found himself in a part of the woods he'd never seen before. Strange symbols were carved into the trees, their meaning lost to time. A sense of unease settled over him, but he pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and defiance. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Lucas stumbled upon a clearing. At its center stood a massive stone altar, weathered and covered in moss. Surrounding it were more of the strange carvings, forming a circle around the altar. Lucas approached cautiously, his breath hitching when he saw what lay atop the stone: a wooden mask, intricately carved to resemble a beast with sharp teeth and piercing eyes. It radiated an aura of power that made his skin prickle. "This must be it," he muttered to himself, reaching out to touch the mask. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, the ground trembled. A low growl echoed through the clearing, sending shivers down Lucas's spine. He turned to see a massive figure emerging from the shadows of the trees. The Guardian was unlike anything Lucas had ever seen. It stood over 8 feet tall, its body a blend of fur and bark, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Its presence was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. "Why have you come?" the creature rumbled, its voice deep and resonant. Lucas froze, his mind racing. I wanted to know the truth about you," he said, his voice shaking but steady. The Guardian stepped closer, its massive form casting a shadow over Lucas. "The truth is not for the curious. It is for those who serve." "Serve?" Lucas asked, his brow furrowing. The Guardian's gaze bore into him. "Embervale has thrived for centuries because of our pact. I protect the village, and the village respects my domain. You have trespassed, breaking the trust of your people." Lucas's defiance faltered under the weight of the creature's words. "I didn't mean to cause harm," he said. "I just wanted to understand." The Guardian studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "You have 2 choices: leave and forget what you've seen, or take up the mantle of protector." Lucas blinked in surprise. "Protector?" The Guardian nodded. The time will come when Embervale faces a great threat. I cannot defend it alone. I need someone to stand beside me, to bridge the gap between man and nature. But the role comes with sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You will leave behind your old life, the Guardian said. Your friends, your family. You will become one with the forest, bound to its will and mine. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on Lucas. He thought of his friends, of the life he'd always known. But he also thought of the village and the generations who had thrived because of the Guardian's protection. I'll do it, he said finally. The Guardian inclined its head. Then kneel. Lucas obeyed, his heart pounding as the creature placed a massive hand on his shoulder. A surge of energy coursed through him, unlike anything he'd ever felt. The world around him seemed to come alive. The trees whispered, the ground pulsed with life, and he could hear the heartbeat of the forest. When he stood, he felt different, stronger, connected. You are now part of the forest, the Guardian said. Your old life is gone, but your purpose is clear. Lucas nodded, a strange sense of peace washing over him. He knew he'd made the right choice. Years passed, and the people of Embervale noticed a change in the forest. The once mysterious and foreboding woods became a place of balance, where danger and safety coexisted. The villagers spoke of a new protector who walked among the trees, unseen but always present. Edwin and Calder often found themselves near the forest's edge, wondering what had become of their friend. Do you think he's still out there? Edwin asked one evening. Calder nodded slowly. I do. And I think he's watching over us, just like he always wanted. In the depths of the forest, Lucas stood beside the Guardian, his senses attuned to every movement, every sound. He no longer felt like a man, but something more, a bridge between two worlds. And as the sun set over Embervale, he knew he would protect it for as long as he lived. The wind howled as thick clouds gathered over the mountains of Idris, where the silent fortress stood. The structure, carved into the rocky cliffs, had a reputation that spanned centuries. It was said that no man who entered the fortress uninvited ever returned. Yet, it wasn't fear but determination that brought Oren, a seasoned ranger, and his companions, Bram and Ewan, to its gates. They had traveled for days, seeking refuge after a mission gone awry. The group had been hired to escort a merchant caravan through dangerous territory, but an ambush by mountain raiders had left them with few supplies and no reward. This place gives me the creeps, Bram muttered, his hand resting uneasily on the hilt of his sword. The youngest of the group, he often wore his nerves on his sleeve. Ewan, the eldest and most pragmatic, chuckled dryly. Better creeps than cold, lad. We'll freeze out here if we don't find shelter soon. Oren studied the towering gates of the fortress. Vines crept along its stone surface, and the carvings of faceless knights adorned the entry. We don't have a choice, he said finally. Let's hope the stories about this place are exaggerated. The gates groaned as they pushed them open. The air inside was colder, heavier, as if the very stones of the fortress held centuries of silence. The men's boots echoed as they walked through the cavernous halls, their torchlight flickering on the damp walls. Doesn't look like anyone's been here for years, Bram said, trying to mask his unease. Ewan knelt to examine the floor. No dust, he observed. Someone, or something, keeps this place clean. Let's not jump to conclusions, Oren said, though he felt a chill run down his spine. We'll rest for the night and leave at first light. They found a large chamber with a crumbling fireplace and managed to kindle a small flame. As they settled in, the fortress seemed to hum with an almost imperceptible sound, like a distant heartbeat. Do you think the stories are true? Bram asked, breaking the silence. Which ones? Ewan replied, leaning against the wall. That this place is cursed? or that it was built by a secret order of knights to guard some ancient treasure? Both, Bram said, his eyes wide. Ewan laughed softly. I think it's just an old fortress left to ruin. If it was cursed, we'd have felt it by now. Oren, however, was less sure. Something about the place felt alive, watching. That night, Oren couldn't sleep. The fire had died down, and the chamber was cast in shadows. He heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. At first, he thought it was Ewan or Bram, but a glance at his companions showed they were sound asleep. Gripping his dagger, Oren crept out of the chamber. The footsteps grew louder as he moved deeper into the fortress. He followed them through twisting corridors and up a spiraling staircase until he reached a door marked with a strange symbol, a circle split by a jagged line. Curiosity overpowered caution. Oren pushed the door open and found himself in a room filled with strange artifacts, rusted swords, shields bearing unfamiliar crests, and a massive stone tablet covered in ancient writing. Fascinating, isn't it? The voice made Oren spin around, his dagger raised. A man stood in the doorway, clad in dark robes. His face was pale, almost ghostly, and his eyes seemed to pierce through Oren. "Who are you?" Oren demanded. The man smiled faintly. "A keeper of this place, and you are an intruder." "We meant no harm," Oren said quickly. "We were seeking shelter." "And you found it," the man replied, stepping into the room. "But few who enter the silent fortress leave unchanged." "What is this place?" Oren asked, lowering his dagger slightly. The man gestured to the artifacts around them. This fortress was built by the Order of the Vale, knights sworn to protect the realm from threats beyond mortal understanding. Their last battle was fought here, and their spirits linger, bound to their duty. Oren felt a shiver run down his spine. "You're saying this place is haunted?" "Not haunted," the man said. "Guarded. The knight's spirits ensure that no one disturbs what lies within." "What lies within?" Oren asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The man's expression darkened. "Something that should never be awakened. Leave while you can, Ranger. You and your companions have no place here." Oren returned to the chamber, his mind racing. He decided not to tell Bram and Ewan what he had seen. If they knew the truth, they might panic, and that could lead to worse outcomes. The next morning, the trio prepared to leave, but the fortress had other plans. The gates, which had opened so easily the day before, were now sealed shut. No matter how hard they pushed or pried, they wouldn't budge. "It's like the place doesn't want us to leave," Bram said, his voice trembling. "Calm down," Ewan said. "We'll find another way." But every corridor they explored seemed to lead them back to where they started. It was as if the fortress itself were alive, shifting its layout to keep them trapped. As the day wore on, their unease grew. Strange sounds echoed through the halls, whispers, footsteps, the clanging of unseen weapons. Shadows moved where there should have been none. Oren couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He thought of the keeper's warning and wondered if they had already crossed a line they couldn't return from. By the second night, the men were exhausted. They returned to the chamber to rest, but none of them could sleep. The whispers had grown louder, and the hum that Oren had noticed earlier now pulsed through the walls. "We need to get out of here," Bram said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This place isn't right." "We will," Oren said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Suddenly, the room went cold. The fire sputtered out, plunging them into darkness. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the chamber. "Why have you come?" The men froze as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a knight, clad in armor blackened with age. His helmet obscured his face, but his glowing eyes pierced the darkness. "We meant no harm," Oren said, stepping forward. "We're just trying to leave." "You trespass on sacred ground," the knight said, his voice like the grinding of stone. "And now you are bound to it." "Bound?" Ewan asked, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "The silent fortress claims those who disturb its peace," the knight said. "You cannot leave until your purpose here is fulfilled." "What purpose?" Orin demanded. "To protect," the knight said. "As we did." The next morning, the men awoke to find themselves in armor, their weapons replaced with those of the knights who had come before. The fortress no longer felt like a prison but a command post, its halls filled with echoes of battles fought long ago. The keeper appeared before them, his expression solemn. "You are now part of the Order of the Vale. Your lives belong to the fortress, and your duty is eternal." Orin felt a strange mix of dread and resolve. He had always sought purpose, and now he had found it, though not in the way he had expected. As the years passed, the men adjusted to their new roles. They became guardians of the fortress, protecting the realm from threats that few would ever know existed. Their names faded from memory, but their spirits endured, bound to the silent fortress and its eternal mission. And so, the legend of the silent fortress lived on, its protectors watching over the land from the shadows, unseen but ever present.